Welcome to Will West Story. Please subscribe and comment where you are watching from. Let's dive in. The town of Redemption's Pass was a monument to monotony, a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled against the unforgiving heat of the Arizona territory. For Clara Finch, the schoolteacher, it was a sanctuary of routine. Each day was a predictable rhythm of chalk dust, whispered lessons, and the comforting creak of her rocking chair. Her life was as plain and unadorned as the scrub brush that dotted the arid landscape, and she preferred it that way. The world beyond her classroom was a place of chaos and danger, a reality she kept at bay with every perfectly copied arithmetic problem. That quiet, well-ordered existence, however, was about to be shattered by the most dangerous and compelling force she had ever encountered. It was just past midday when he came into town, not with the bravado of a lone rider, but with the staggered gait of a man on the brink of collapse. He was a canvas of dust and blood, a dark stain of a man who drew every eye with a terrible charisma. His hat was pulled low, but as he stumbled and leaned against the hitching post outside the saloon, a ray of sun caught the sharp, angular line of his jaw and the weary glint in his piercing blue eyes. Clara, leaving the general store with her week's provisions, felt a strange, cold flutter in her chest. The town's single lawman, Sheriff Barnaby Thorne, a man whose presence was as constant and immovable as the mountain range, was already striding toward the stranger, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. The town held its breath, expecting a violent end. But instead, the stranger's hand went not to a gun, but to his side, where a dark, sticky patch had soaked through his buckskin jacket. His legs gave out from under him, and he sank to the dust, a whispered name on his lips. It was then that a flash of silver on his belt caught the light. A small, intricate buckle depicting a soaring hawk, a design Clara knew from the wanted posters that occasionally found their way to the post office. He was an outlaw on the run, a ghost from the Badlands, and as his feverish eyes met hers across the street, a silent plea passed between them. In that moment, a quiet teacher's life was no longer her own. She had a choice to make, one that would redefine everything she knew. Clara's small cabin, usually a bastion of order and stillness, became a hotbed of whispered secrets and shared anxieties. The outlaw, whose name was Cole, lay on her makeshift cot, his face pale and drawn, a fever clouding his senses. She had risked everything to get him here, her respectable reputation shredded by the single, decisive act of defiance. The town's gossipmongers had been in a frenzy, but she had met their stares with a stony resolve she didn't know she possessed. Now, in the dead of night, she tended to his wounds, her gentle hands a stark contrast to the hardened lines of his body. As the fever began to recede, he grew more lucid, and the man she had seen on the wanted posters, a cold, heartless criminal, began to give way to something else entirely. He spoke of injustices, of a powerful railroad baron who had cheated honest ranchers out of their land, and of a life on the run that was born not of greed, but of a broken justice system. His stories were cinematic and heartbreaking, and with each one, the walls Clara had built around her heart began to crumble. The dangerous game they played was a whisper on the wind. The sheriff, Barnaby Thorne, was a good man, but a relentless one. He knew the stranger hadn't just vanished. He was canvassing the town, his gaze lingering on the homes of those who had shown any sign of sympathy for the outlaw. The scent of blood and medicinal herbs in a town like Redemption's Pass was impossible to hide. Clara knew he was closing in, but with every passing hour, her resolve to protect Cole hardened. She saw not a criminal, but a kindred spirit, a man who, like her, was a prisoner of a life he hadn't chosen. He was a wild, untamable force, and yet he spoke with a quiet depth that she understood perfectly. He had found a refuge in her quiet solitude, and she had found a spark of a dangerous, thrilling freedom in his chaos. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, the sound of a lone rider approached her cabin. It was not the rhythmic canter of a posse, but the steady, deliberate hoofbeats of a lawman. A heavy knock echoed through the silence of the morning. "Clara?" The sheriff's voice called, firm but not unkind. "I need to ask you some questions." And Cole, who was now conscious and alert, lay hidden in the small space beneath her floorboards. The knock on the door was the sound of her respectable life coming to claim her. Clara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she opened the door, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. Sheriff Thorne stood on her porch, his silhouette a dark, imposing line against the rising sun. His gaze swept over her, taking in the loose strands of hair, the faint smudges of dirt on her apron, the small details that told a story she desperately needed to hide. "My apologies for the early hour, ma'am," he said, his voice low and serious. "But I have reason to believe the man we're looking for is hiding in town. Some folks say he might have sought a kind soul's help." He paused, his eyes piercing through her with a quiet intensity. "You're a good woman, Clara. A woman of God and books. The law can be a harsh mistress, but a just one. It's best to be on its side." The unspoken question hung in the air like a thick dust cloud. Had she helped him? Was he in her home? Clara met his gaze, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their tremble. She spoke of her quiet evening, her early rise, the mundane details of a life with nothing to hide. She managed to divert his suspicions for the moment, but the sheriff was not easily fooled. He was a man who knew the secrets of Redemption's Pass as intimately as the lines on his own weathered hands. He lingered for a moment, his eyes scanning the open window, the misplaced book on the floor, the scent of antiseptic that he was perhaps too polite to mention. She felt his distrust like a physical weight. But her conviction was stronger than her fear. She knew, with a certainty that defied all reason, that Cole was not the monster the posters claimed he was. She had seen the man behind the myth. As the sheriff turned to leave, he offered one final, ominous piece of advice. "The Badlands are filled with men who talk a good game, Clara. But a man's true character is revealed when he's got nowhere left to run. Be careful who you choose to run with." The moment the door clicked shut, Clara collapsed against it, her strength completely gone. She had chosen. She had lied to a good man to protect an outlaw, and there was no turning back now. The moment she heard his horse's hooves fade into the distance, she went to the floorboards. "We have to leave," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Now." The dust storm that swept through Redemption's Pass that afternoon was a biblical force, a churning, blinding wall of red grit that swallowed the sun. It was their salvation and their torment. With the storm as their cover, Clara and Cole slipped out of town, a stolen horse and 2 canteens their only provisions. The wind howled like a banshee, and the world was reduced to a claustrophobic swirl of red. They rode for hours, the storm masking their tracks and drowning out the sound of any pursuers. The journey was treacherous, a test of their shared desperation. As they navigated a narrow, twisting canyon trail, the ground began to tremble. A rockslide, a small one at first, rained down upon them, sending their horses into a panicked frenzy. They were forced to abandon their mounts and continue on foot, scrambling over jagged rocks and through narrow crevices. The canyon, once their hiding place, was now a labyrinth of unforgiving stone, a testament to the harsh reality of their new life. Through it all, Cole never let go of her hand. He pulled her up steep inclines, shielded her from falling stones, and pushed her ahead of him when the path narrowed to a dangerous edge. It was in the suffocating silence of a small cave, where they took shelter from a torrential downpour that followed the storm, that he began to tell her more. He spoke of the betrayal not as a victim, but as a man who had been pushed past his breaking point. The railroad tycoon, a man named Sterling Vance, had promised prosperity and then systematically ruined every small landholder in the valley, claiming their land for his own. Cole, a former rancher, had organized a group to fight back, a group of men and women who had lost everything. He was a leader, not a criminal. He was a protector, not a predator. And in the face of his brutal honesty, Clara felt a deep, profound understanding settle in her heart. He was an outlaw in the eyes of the law, but a hero in the eyes of his people. He was her hero now. As the rain let up and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds, he led her on. A final turn in the canyon path opened up into a breathtaking sight. Spread out below them was a hidden valley, an entire community nestled in the heart of the Badlands. Campfires dotted the landscape, and the sounds of laughter and music drifted on the night air. It was a thriving town, a lawless sanctuary. "Welcome home," Cole said, his voice soft. He had not brought her to a simple hideout, but to his world, a world of outcasts and rebels. Clara looked on in astonishment, realizing she had just crossed an impossible line. Her journey from the quiet safety of Redemption's Pass had just begun. Clara's introduction to the Outlaw encampment was a sensory assault. Far from the dusty, desolate image she had of a criminal hideout, this was a living, breathing community. It was a chaotic tapestry of old tents, makeshift saloons, and ramshackle corrals filled with healthy, well-fed horses. The men and women who lived here were a motley crew: scarred gunslingers, weary prospectors, and families who had been forced from their homes by the relentless march of the railroad. She was a curiosity, a woman in a prim dress and sensible shoes among a sea of leather and denim. But they treated her not with suspicion, but with a wary respect, a deference earned by her connection to Cole. She found herself, the schoolteacher, adapting with a speed that surprised even her. She began to teach the children, using a stick to draw letters in the dirt, her quiet, steady voice a calming presence in the camp's raucous energy. For the first time, she felt her skills were not just a profession, but a vital contribution to a community that desperately needed hope. Cole, meanwhile, was a different man here. He was a leader, charismatic and confident, moving among his people with an easy authority. His love for her was a quiet flame, a look across a crowded campfire, a hand that would find hers in the darkness. But the peace they had found was a fleeting one. A rider, a scout for the camp, galloped in with grim news. A notorious bounty hunter, a man named Silas Vance, was hot on their trail. Silas was known not just for his skill with a gun, but for his twisted game of psychological torment. He hunted not for money, but for the pleasure of the chase, and he had a reputation for getting his man, no matter the cost. His calling card was a single silver bullet left on the body of his victims. The rider's report was a stark one. An old friend of Cole's, a prospector who had not been with the group for years, had been found dead, a silver bullet nestled in his open palm. The message was clear. The bounty hunter knew who Cole was and where he had been. He was coming for him, and he would use anyone and everyone to get to him. The hunt had just turned personal. The bounty hunter, Silas Vance, was a ghost in the desert. He left no tracks and moved with a terrifying silence, his presence only announced by the bodies of men who had once ridden with Cole. Each new victim, each silver bullet, tightened the noose around the camp. The air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread. The freedom Cole and Clara had found in the desert was tainted by the shadow of a coming death. They stole what moments they could, their love a small, fierce light in the growing darkness. One night, they rode away from the camp, up to a high desert mesa overlooking the vast expanse of the valley. The sky was a canvas of 1,000,000 stars, a breathtaking display of cosmic indifference. In that moment, with the world far below them, they felt a desperate, perfect peace. Cole held her close, his arms a safe harbor. "This is it, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is the life I'm fighting for. One where the only law is the sun and the stars." He spoke of a life together, of finding a small, forgotten patch of land, far from the reach of the law or the bounty hunter. It was a dream they both desperately clung to, a future that seemed impossibly far away. But their moment of peace was shattered by a new message, delivered by one of the camp scouts who found them on the mesa. Silas Vance had made his final move. He had ridden into Redemption's Pass, the one place Cole had tried to protect, and left a note on the saloon door. The note was addressed to Cole, a simple, chilling message. "Come to the place you ran from, or watch it burn." The bounty hunter wasn't after Cole's gold or a simple capture. He was after his soul, forcing him to choose between the life he had built and the one he had left behind. He was forcing Cole to return to the town where his dangerous life had first intertwined with Clara's respectable one. The choice was agonizing. To go back meant almost certain death. To stay away meant her town, her past, her home, would be annihilated. Clara refused to be left behind. She insisted on riding with Cole, her quiet determination a match for his stubborn refusal. They returned to Redemption's Pass under the cover of a desolate, moonless night. The town was a tense, silent graveyard, its streets deserted, its windows dark. The townsfolk were huddled in their homes, a collective sense of fear hanging in the air. As they rode in, a lone figure stood waiting in the center of the dusty main street. It was Silas Vance, a tall, gaunt figure in a long duster, his hands resting lightly on the butts of his twin pistols. The town clock began to toll the hour, midnight. The classic showdown. But this was not a matter of honor or of a simple bounty. Vance, Cole's voice cut through the stillness. This ends now. Silas smiled, a thin, cruel slash on his face. This began a long time ago, Mr. Colton. And it ends where it started. He revealed his true identity, a name that made Clara's blood run cold. He was not just a bounty hunter, he was Sterling Vance, the very railroad tycoon who had betrayed Cole. He had hunted Cole not for money, but for pure, unadulterated revenge, determined to erase the last symbol of his failure. The showdown was no longer about a past crime, but about a personal vendetta. Cole drew his pistol, but before the first shot could be fired, a strange, metallic glint caught the moonlight from the rooftop of the general store. The single, sharp crack of a rifle echoed through the silence, not from Vance's weapon, but from a third party. The bullet whizzed past both men, embedding itself in the wooden post behind Cole's head. It was a warning shot, a signal. A flash of light from the rooftop revealed not a lone figure, but two more gunmen, their rifles leveled at both Cole and Vance. This was not a duel, it was a setup, and the men who were hunting them were not aligned with either side. The silence was broken by the sound of boots on the rooftops, the click-clack of rifle bolts. The ambush was on. The third party was not there for a bounty or revenge, they were there to eliminate a problem. The railroad company, it was clear, wanted both Cole and Sterling Vance dead, to erase all evidence of their crimes and betrayals. The two enemies, Cole and Vance, a wanted outlaw and a ruthless tycoon, found themselves in a temporary, bizarre alliance. As the first bullets from the rooftops began to rain down, they were forced to fight side by side, their former animosity eclipsed by the immediate threat to their lives. The quiet streets of Redemption's Pass exploded into a chaotic, cinematic ballet of gunfire and desperation. Clara, watching from the shadows of the livery, her heart in her throat, used her knowledge of the town to her advantage. She had spent years here, and she knew its every nook and cranny. She was no fighter, but she was a tactician. She shouted directions to Cole, pointing out concealed gunmen, her quiet voice a beacon of tactical support in the hellish chaos. The gunfight raged through the saloon, the general store, and the dusty streets. In the heart of the chaos, as Cole and Vance found themselves back to back, a sniper's bullet tore through the air, aimed squarely at Cole. But at the last second, a figure lunged into its path. It was Sheriff Barnaby Thorne, who had emerged from his office, his face a grim mask of duty and defiance. The bullet struck him squarely in the chest. He fell to the ground, a single gasp of pain escaping his lips. Cole knelt by him, the fury of the gunfight fading around them. "Clara," the sheriff whispered, his eyes finding hers. "Take this." With a trembling hand, he pressed a folded piece of paper into her palm. "It's a code, it's the proof. A list of names, and the railroad's plans." He looked at Cole, his eyes filled with a sad understanding. A man's true character is revealed when he's got nowhere left to run. You fought for Redemption's Pass. For Clara. The law can wait. Get this to the state. With a final rattling breath, the sheriff was gone, a good man who had died for an outlaw and a schoolteacher. He had made his choice. And now, armed with a coded document that could bring down an empire, Cole and Clara had to make theirs. With Sheriff Thorne's dying gift clutched in her hand, Clara understood the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about their lives anymore, it was about justice. The paper held the key to exposing the railroad's conspiracy and bringing down Sterling Vance for good. But with the town now a hotbed of company assassins, their only choice was to ride. They stole 2 horses and galloped out into the pre-dawn darkness, the coded document a fragile, life-changing burden. The next day was a desperate, punishing journey through the unforgiving desert. The railroad's hired guns, now knowing their objective, pursued them relentlessly. The chase was a grim race against time, with the thundering of hooves and the crack of distant rifle fire serving as a constant reminder of their mortality. Clara, now a true partner in this dangerous game, rode with a fierce determination she had never known. The quiet schoolteacher had been replaced by a hardened survivor. They were cornered on a high, narrow plateau with the sun setting, casting long, menacing shadows. A sheer drop of 100 feet plunged to a churning river below. On the other side, the railroad's men slowly advanced, their rifles aimed. There was no escape. They were trapped between a cliff and a ruthless, corporate-funded firing squad. Cole turned to Clara, his face a mask of resolute love and quiet despair. "I won't let them take you," he said, his voice raw. He had promised her freedom, and he would die to see that promise kept. He took the coated paper from her hand, tucked it into his jacket, and looked down at the rapids below. It was a leap of faith, a final, impossible gamble. He looked at Clara, and in his eyes, she saw the promise of a future, no matter how slim. With a final, desperate cry, he turned and pushed her toward the edge, pulling her into a dizzying, terrifying freefall. They plunged off the cliff, a silent, desperate prayer on their lips, into the roaring, unforgiving rapids below. Their fate, and the fate of an empire, was now in the hands of the river. The river was a chaotic fury, but it was their salvation. They were battered and bruised, but the rapids carried them far from the waiting gunmen. When they finally dragged themselves onto the riverbank, soaked and exhausted, the sun was rising, painting the world in a wash of soft gold and fiery orange. They had survived. Their final, desperate gamble had paid off. With the coded documents still miraculously intact, they made their way to the state capital, a journey that took days of walking, begging for food, and hiding in the shadows. Finally, they reached the office of the governor. The evidence was presented, the codes were deciphered, and the railroad's sprawling, criminal enterprise began to unravel. Sterling Vance was arrested for conspiracy, racketeering, and murder. The reign of his corporate greed was over. Cole, for his role in exposing the corruption and for his cooperation, was granted a full pardon. The life of an outlaw, of a man on the run, was over. He was free. But so was Clara. The quiet schoolteacher had become a hero. Her bravery, her loyalty, and her quiet intelligence were spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. She could have her respectable life back, and more. She could have a hero's welcome in a town that she had saved. But the question remained, was that the life she truly wanted anymore? She met Cole at the edge of town, at a crossroads where two dusty roads diverged. One led back to Redemption's Pass, to her old life, a life of comfort and predictability. The other road was unmarked, a dusty, endless ribbon leading into a new, unknown horizon. It was a path with no name, a journey into a future they would build together. There was no longer a need to choose between a respectable life and a dangerous freedom. Their love had forged a third path, a life that was both dangerous and respectable, one where they would write their own rules. With a smile that reached her eyes, she walked past the familiar road, and toward him. She took his hand, and together, they turned their backs on the past and began to walk toward the dawn. The only thing they left behind was the dust. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, share and comment below.